The whole thing centers around the word integration.
East Texas State University began the process of desegregation in 1964. That summer, then University President and outspoken segregationist James Gee called together all faculty and staff to announce ET's immediate compliance with civil rights legislation mandating desegregation at the last two public colleges still upholding racial barriers. This is a story about what happened next. If, as Martin Luther King argued in 1958, segregation led to the hate based on fear resulting from the unknown, perpetuated by the lack of communication forced by our physical and legal separation. How did communication change after desegregation reached this rural university town?
Here is Claude Shannon's diagram by which almost any communication process can be schematically represented. The information source selects the desired message out of a set of possible messages. The transmitter changes the message into the signal, which is sent over the communications channel to the receiver, where it is decoded back into the message and delivered to the destination.
It makes a grand Christmas gift, and so do the other Sylvania radios, the Catalina Portable, the radio clocks, including the Nightlighter with panelescent dial, and the powerful table radios. All are handsome to look at and wonderful to hear.
On AM radio in North America, clear channel stations are those most protected from interference from other stations. A clear channel. Theoretically, perhaps the speech Gee delivered in 1964 and the admission policies that followed should have enabled the sorts of communication across difference integration promised. Of course, proximity alone did not solve racism in America. Meaningful communication across difference required far more than a change in admissions policies.
For some, the answer is tremendously complicated, tied up in a maze of past associations and present influences. Sometimes opinions are expressed with grave misgivings and a sense of guilt. The past slips through despite what is said.
Every such system contains noise. Noise is a term used in the communications field to designate any outside force which acts on the transmitted signal to vary it from the original.
Noise both complicated the desired communication and enabled the establishment of new channels necessary for that communication. The process began the minute the first African American student set foot on our campus.
Oh, yeah? That college you're going to? Where's it at? Texas, partner, that's where it's at. Draw! This is great for the people and makes the eggshells even thinner for the Secret Service, whose job it is to guard the man. And here they come, right down toward us. I can see Mrs. Kennedy. And they're going to come right on down and shake hands with everybody. Mrs. Kennedy gave a lovely smile and a wave at that time. Mrs. Kennedy stepping in the car first. Now the President. They both in the back seat now.
Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago. Vice President Lyndon Johnson has left the hospital in Dallas, but we do not know to where he has proceeded. Presumably, he will be taking the oath of office shortly and become the 36th President of the United States.
Less than an hour's drive from Dallas, where JFK would breathe his last breath in 1963, ETSU students and local citizens felt the ripple of social justice, just as profoundly as they felt the sting of Jim Crow. Desegregation changed everything. Desegregation changed nothing.
I have some very sad news for all of you, and I think sad news for all of our fellow citizens and people who love peace all over the world. And that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis, Tennessee.
Noise continued to challenge any meaningful communication across difference, locally, nationally, across the globe.
If anything acts on the signal so as to vary it in an unpredictable and undesirable way in the communication system, it is noise.
Noise filled the airwaves in 1968. The assassinations of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, campus unrest hit a crescendo as losses suffered in Vietnam became increasingly intolerable and the promises of civil rights legislation appeared increasingly unlikely. In 1968, at the Mexico City Olympics, sprinters John Carlos and Tommie Smith called global attention to the persistence of racism by taking full advantage of the means of persuasion available to them as black athletes representing the nation to the world. The world was watching. The message they tried to transmit through that global channel was one of black resistance. Why should we run in Mexico? OPHR insisted. Only to crawl at home. The message received by the dominant power structures for whom it was intended differed profoundly from the one intended. Until recently, however, the message they intended, like the meaning behind much of the rhetoric of Black Power, was rewritten and then altogether silenced by the racist politics that movement opposed.
Joshua, you better choose your friends right at that college. Texas isn't 118th Street, you know.
Yeah, I know, Mama.
E.T. recruited John Carlos from Harlem in 1966, just 2 years before the global demonstration of what Edward P.J. Corbett would call the rhetoric of the closed fist. As part of Counterpublic called upon the discourse surrounding collective resistance by any means necessary, Carlos was highly attuned to racism complexity and ubiquity. He knew racism's key challenges were just as present in the North as they were everywhere else. Yet he had never before experienced the overt forms of racism segregation presented, not personally at least. Along with his young wife and their 2-year-old daughter, as Dr. Carlos recalls decades later, we agreed to make a home for ourselves in Commerce, but every last shred of dignity that we took with us to Texas was challenged.
People were burning on the news that King got killed, and being in Dallas, you know, it's TV for everything. And funny thing, it was no, you know, they were burning like in Chicago, burning like in Atlanta, the big cities burning, and Dallas didn't burn. I mean, like Joe said, I mean, we were mad. We, you know, anything I don't, you know, it's just, it touches you because of the fact he was like John Carlos later on. You know, John stood up for us. You know, nobody else would. Martin Luther King stood up for us, nobody else would. Medgar Evers, you know, and it's like, well, just shoot him like an animal, and that'll kill the dream.
There are other factors which can keep the information from reaching its destination intact. The background and conditioning of the receiving apparatus may so differ from that of the transmitter that it may be impossible for the receiver to pick up the signals without distortion.
Distortion during such difficult times seems inevitable. Meaningful communication across difference is difficult even in the best of circumstances. These were not the best of circumstances.
They took me out. I just noticed when I was coming in, I guess it was Highway Farm FM 1570. It was at that time it was called the Meadowview Hotel, and so we went there and got a room and stuff. And so we went in, and so this guy takes his gun off and his belt off and slams on the lid. I said, "Well, if we have any problems, I'll be able to handle it. You know, whatever I'm going." I didn't sleep at all. At some point in time, we came back to Commerce, and when I got back, the FBI were here.
Against this backdrop, local African American students were nevertheless able to establish a viable channel for communication with campus administrators. To say the least, we were pleased and somewhat excited, writes Margie Hale in a report following the May 1968 site visit on behalf of the Students for a Democratic Society. Based on her observation as a regional SDS field representative, during this National Student Activist Organization's very first visit to the isolated campus, Hale concludes that not only are there people at ETSU ready for activism, but there is strong indication that this region is populated with hundreds of potentially radical students, and it is up to us to find them. I think I could speak for this entire region in saying, welcome to our new brothers and sisters in commerce. With Joe Tave, who became the organization's president on the night of MLK's assassination, ACID presented university administrators with a Declaration of Rights that included rights to African American faculty and administrators, fair and equal housing, access to campus employment, and courses in African American studies. In a few short years, all of their demands would be met, setting in motion a series of key hires and other changes that made future communication channels possible and locally meaningful.
You can kill a dreamer, but not to dream.
They had 4 and 5 lines, telephone lines, the party lines, shall I say, on their telephones. Those that had telephones, the electricity, you could have it in your house, but the streets were dark. That's one reason they called it the hole. When I moved there, that was just that the younger people call it the hole in the Norris community.
They called it the Hole, this historically segregated neighborhood located on the other side of town, on the other side of Division Street, on the other side of the tracks, literally. In a widely circulated photo essay published in the glossy campus magazine E.T. Special in 1973, a Norris community pastor describes his neighborhood as a forgotten community, treated with benevolent paternalism by City Hall. The tone throughout this article echoes patterns of communication breakdown that span the better part of a century. I've been living here 40 years, explains another Norris resident, and the city has promised sewage and other improvements long overdue, but the money plays out right at the tracks.
Communication is that which links any organism together. It is communication that keeps a society together. And though these people seem unaware of each other's existence, neither looking nor speaking, one group meets and filters through the other, with hardly two individuals coming in contact. So constant is the flow of information, and so complex the web of communication that keeps them apart and holds them together.
In 1973, university students and local citizens created the Norris Community Club, a university community partnership designed to challenge racial inequities persisting long after civil rights legislation had promised otherwise. To accomplish the desired reform, NCC provided what they called a clear channel of communication between the city and residents of Norris, the town's historically segregated neighborhood. That channel mobilized the community as never before, leading to significant changes like the election of a city official who, as NCC President Billy Reed explains, understood the needs of the people in Norris community and was willing to do something about it, and the extensive funding needed to improve neighborhood street sewage and telephone services. It wasn't easy. Such things never are.
Here is the shame of our American cities. Here is the face of our cities we hide.
Dulles told me there were where the African Americans live. He used the phrase, they're down in the hole. The hole.
I don't know if they call it Norris Community, they call it the hole.
The residents did as well?
The residents called it somewhat the hole, yeah.
Sewer problems, outhouses. Being from the South, born in the South, I remember the outhouses. I used the outhouse. Hello? Yeah, when I was a little boy down in Selma, Alabama. And so I knew about outhouses, but I couldn't believe in 1973 that people still were using outhouses and unpaved streets and communities that's been neglected, way away from the university, down in the hole. I just couldn't see that.
Something like this, we wear those to the church and then we put those off and put on our dress shoes. So this is how we would come to church in this change and put on our dress shoes. Then we get ready to church, we put our boots back on because the road was so muddy and so bad.
Sam Rayburn, an ET alumnus and U.S. Congressman, was fond of this rural district he represented from 1913 to 1961. I want my people out of the mud, and I want my people out of the dark. This conviction led to the Rural Electrification Act in 1936, the establishment of the Federal Communications Commission in 1934, and related efforts to link the people in his isolated district through small airports and numerous farm-to-market roads.
America is at work.
It did not, however, lead to related changes in the vast majority of America's poor minority communities like Norris.
Don't tell us that this is the best that you can do in building cities.
We've got to prevent things like this happening from now on, but we can't do it without public support.
But there are also many examples of times when the message has been conceived and the signal sent long in advance of understanding or acceptance of the code employed.
Advocates across the civil rights movement spent decades transmitting a message meant to overturn segregation and related discrimination. Long after the original messages were sent, communities across the nation began to understand and accept the code employed. Message received, at least as mandated by law. Far too little changed in everyday life as a result of such legislation, but conversations surrounding overt racism have clearly shifted in significant and important ways. Today, more than 40 years after John Carlos and Tommie Smith sent their original message at the 1968 Olympics, the world is finally beginning to receive that message as transmitted, and with far less distortion than ever before.